More than half of the deadly crashes in Ohio in 2023 involved drugs or alcohol. And law enforcement officers say drugged driving is becoming more of a problem than drunk driving, especially with the recent legalization of marijuana. So, how do officers help to catch, stop, and prosecute those driving under the influence? Sophia Pericone, she went to Columbus to learn about the drug recognition experts.
Most law enforcement officers are trained to make a traffic stop, and when they suspect a driver is under the influence, many know how to conduct a standard field sobriety test. But an even smaller group of officers are actual certified drug recognition experts, and it's their thorough training that helps keep other drivers safe on the roads. They're trained to catch what others might miss.
We showed 4 clues in both the left and right.
And serve as expert witnesses in court.
His internal clock was quite a bit off.
And right now, there are fewer than 200 of them in the entire state.
We came up with a dissociative anesthetic and cannabis combo.
Drug recognition experts, or DREs, aren't your typical law enforcement officers. They're called in after someone has already been arrested for suspected driving under the influence.
The DRE is looking for a few things. One, they're first going to determine, is the person impaired? If that answer is yes, then they're going to move forward with the process. If they're saying, I don't know if they're impaired, could it be medical? They're going to determine that. And then they're going to say maybe there's no impairment here whatsoever.
Ohio State Highway Patrol Lieutenant Nathan Dennis says the work of DREs stretches beyond roadside sobriety tests.
Once they're done with 12 steps, there's a drug matrix that they utilize as a reference in their training. And what they do is they come to a conclusion about what drug category they think the person may be impaired by. That could be one drug category, it could be multiple drug categories.
Lieutenant Dennis calls it an added tool in a department's belt, but getting that tool isn't easy, and not every department has one. That's because it requires at least 200 hours of learning, training, studying, and testing, starting with a competitive application process, hours of school, then a test, fail, and
They get to go home.
Robert Coley, chief of Shawnee Township Police Department just outside of Lima, and a DRE instructor, says pass and it's on to phase 2 and another week's worth of schooling.
They'll have things like how to take blood pressure, pulse, measure pupils, drug categories, signs and symptoms of drug impairment, memorization of generalized signs and symptoms and those major indicators of impairment. All those things must be memorized by these students.
Then another test. Again, fail and go home. Pass and it's off to Jacksonville, Florida.
What they'll do is they'll go do 12 evaluations. And within those 12 evaluations on real people, they have to make 12 proper calls in regard to what the impairment is.
And their success rate has to be 12 out of 12 for good reason. Oftentimes, a DRE is the only law enforcement officer able to spot the difference between drug impairment and a mental health episode.
You can have medical conditions that may mimic some drug impairments, and we're obviously aware of that. Drug impairment, however, will throw you out of what we call homeostasis. All we're doing is taking things from medical knowledge and applying that to these drug influence evaluations.
Their accuracy and expertise is also crucial in court.
They're not just fact witnesses anymore. They're expert witnesses.
Holly Reese, an Ohio traffic safety resource prosecutor, says she often calls on DREs for testimony to point to medical signs of impairment.
They could actually explain, well, here's all the signs, symptoms, body temperature, pulse rate, everything else. Here's how I can explain to you and show their impairment.
But in the big picture, there aren't that many DREs in the state that can serve as expert witnesses and get impaired drivers off the road. According to OSHP, there are 163 of them across 80 law enforcement agencies in Ohio. That's a drop in the bucket out of the state's nearly 900 agencies.
If anybody requests a DRE to come to their agency because they've arrested what they suspect is a drug impaired driver, any DRE that is certified in Ohio can go assist them and do an evaluation for them.
In District 1, which is bound by Williams, Lucas, Hardin, and Van Wert counties, there are 14 DREs, which means the few that there are oftentimes travel when requested to give their expert opinion.
In Northeast Ohio, at one point, we only had 3 or 4 from 3 or 4 different departments. So they were traveling an hour to go do an evaluation when, meanwhile, the person's impairment is decreasing because they're in custody.
And for more rural counties in Northwest Ohio, that's nothing new.
Usually we had about an hour minimum time before we could get a DRE available.
Archbold Police Sergeant Bradley Marilat is training to become the department's first DRE. Since joining Archbold PD about 5 years ago, he says there's been an increase in drugged driving.
The driving while intoxicated under drugs has been a big problem. There's times that I've made stops and I've had that feeling and knowing that I know somebody's impaired, but I can't quite articulate it to the high standard that should be a probable cause for that impaired driver.
If Sergeant Marilat passes, he'll be Northwest Ohio's 15th DRE, a huge win for communities he says need it the most.
We're reinvesting in our community, and the knowledge that we gain here at this class is really going to benefit not only myself but our patrolmen as well, and the surrounding area too. So we're in Archbold and we border 4 counties right there that don't have many of those DREs available.
There are 2 DRE classes each year in Ohio, and to give you an idea of how competitive and rigorous it is, there are only about 10 students in the current class, and of those 10, 3 are from Northwest Ohio, including Sergeant Bradley Marilat. Those who pass the most recent test will head to Florida next week for their final field certification evaluations. In studio, Sophia Periconi, WTOL 11.